Welcome back to the Growth Hacking Culture Podcast. Let's talk about a workplace buzzword that has been thrown around so much. It has almost lost any meaning, psychological safety. Everyone says they want it. But let's be real, most companies are failing miserably at actually creating it. The numbers don't lie. A McKinsey report revealed a shocking disconnect. 75% of executives claim psychological safety is important, yet only 25% of employees actually feel it. That's not a gap, that's a mega chasm. And that chasm is costing companies a lot. We are talking about stifle innovation, risk averse teams, sky high turnover, and a breeding ground for ethical problems. Gallup research confirms it. Teams with genuine psychological safeties are 17% more likely to report high performance and 20% less likely to make mistakes. So the question isn't if it matters, but why so many companies are getting it so wrong. The problem is that most organizations treat psychological safety like a quick fix, a box to tick. They throw money to superficial solutions, trust falls, vulnerability workshops, let's hug each other, maybe even a pizza party. But they are just band aids on a gaping wound. They ignore the systemic issues, the deep rooted cultural problems that create psychological friction. We're talking about the power of imbalances, the fear of speaking truth to power, the toxic competition that pits individuals against each other. These are the real obstacles, the elephants in the room that no one wants to acknowledge. And until we address these issues, all the team building exercises in the world won't make a damn bit of difference. Nogol, you're smiling. You love that. It's so passionate.
Yes,
This
yes, yes.
topic is so bloody important for me. But today, in this episode, I'm honored to welcome Nogol Madani, the founder and CEO of Glee Factor, a company dedicated to enhancing team dynamics through psychological safety and experiential learning. With a background in engineering, sister, and years of experience leading Glee Factor, Nogol has collaborated with recognized organizations like Google and CBC to foster inclusive and high performing teams. And by the way, she has some academical background that is serious. She's part of the faculty member of the McGill Executive Institute. Love that CV, Nogol, and
Thank you
welcome
so
to the Growth
much.
Hacking Culture podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Ivan. Thank you.
Listen, Nogol, well, it's pure interest. How did you end up from the beautiful world of engineering into the science of understanding humans?
Yes, that's a very good question. So, I studied engineering. I got my master's in Canada at McGill, and I worked as an engineer for a few years. But then I think that I just firsthand experienced this idea that even though I was good at engineering roles, the team dynamics, there was sometimes stifling people's potentials, especially someone like me, woman of color. Like at the time, I was a newcomer, female engineer. So this idea of culture, engagement, how we create teams that are like, inclusive and it's for everyone, it became interesting for me. At the time, I didn't have any of these words, obviously, but I started to do some research. And in 2016, I decided to quit my engineering career and started to work on like, how can we create like better culture so that everyone can thrive in it. And in 2018, I reached out to all the professors in Montreal in organizational behavior, like, human system intervention, social psychology, and their PhD students. And it's like, guys, help me out. I want to see what is at the core of successful teams. And one PhD candidate in organizational behavior, and now she's an assistant professor. She reached out and said, "Okay, I'm just gonna, help you out." And we've done like few months of research, and she came back and said that the answer is psychological safety, and that was at the end of 2018 until now. This is the word that it's been our north star for our work, basically.
Nogol, what is crazy is that despite that we have left the world of engineering, you keep that little thing inside that makes you question from a perspective of science.
Yes.
and experiment instead of believing that yoga is a solution or let's do some breathing
Yes.
exercises. It's about why would it work? And then we
Yes.
try it. And then we try to find validation through science that stays with us to be an
Yes,
engineer, right?
that's exactly it. I think that, I did my master's in like research, and I did my thesis and all of that. And I think that mindset, because when you change careers, you don't know what you're getting from the old ones, but I think that actually stayed with me. And even though I had my firsthand experience and I was really reading lots of books, at some point I thought, no, like it has to be a more concrete background, like science-based background to this. And also we have to create a more blueprint, for people to
Mm,
do the work instead of just talking like big things. I think like that was probably the privilege that I had, compared to other people in this like industry, that it's a bit more, let's say, sometimes inspiration and in storytelling. But for me, as someone who built mines, I said no, but it has to be something that works. Basically it has to be actionable and it has to make sense. Yeah.
mm. Let's dive a little bit more into the topic.
Yes.
Beyond this basic definition, how would you define actionable psychological safety in
Yes.
the workplace? What do you see when somebody has it or doesn't have it?
Yes. That's actually a very good question. Because, when Sarah, like the PhD candidate, she actually talked to me about psychological safety. I've already seen it in like LinkedIn, I've already read it in books, and I had certain like definitions around it. But then I think that when we went back to Amy Edmondson's definition, which was like some, she's the professor at Harvard University that did the research back in 1999. She came up with the term. I mean, the terminology existed in the 50s, but then
Mhm.
she really reused it as this phenomenon that every team member feels comfortable to take interpersonal risks. And there are two interesting things here. One is that everyone feels comfortable doing that because, we talk to lots of leaders and they think that, oh my goodness, I can actually take risks in the workplace. But this is not necessarily the reality of the person who's just joined or someone who's a bit more junior. That's one thing. And the other thing is interpersonal risks. So to your point, what are interpersonal risks? They're the things that we can see all the time. We always say that as social species in the group setup, we don't want to be seen as like difficult people. We don't want to be that person that, contradicts things, say no all the time, disagrees. We don't want to create like, we don't want to actually be judged about. So, how do we feel like sharing our idea? Disagreeing with people, like giving feedback,
Mm,
asking for help, like saying, I don't know. Like these are all interpersonal risks. These are the behaviors that we feel that, okay, there might be a bit of judgment. There might be like, a bit of like retaliation. We might damage work relationship if we give a feedback. But at the same time, these are the behaviors that are at the core of learning and team performance. So
mm,
psychological safety is really that environment that it's you don't you're not fearful or you're not afraid to speak up and to share your mind. And it's really non-judgmental. There's no fear of shame and there's no fear of failure.
mm,
So I have to say that, Yvonne, that when we say that, everyone said, oh my goodness, then everyone's going to talk for hours. It's not about that. It's not about comfortable environment. It's not about pampering people. It's not about necessarily safe space. So many people interchangeably use psychological safety and safe space. We can use psychological safety to create a safe environment if it's needed, if we're going through a crisis, if our team is going through a crisis, if we have a new hire. But at the core is a climate that is characterized by candor. So there is a sense of directness,
mm,
there is disagreement, there is discomfort,
mm,
but it's always happening in a space that is respect. There's no shame and there is no failure. And that's why it favors learning and performance.
mm. But there is this notion of risk taking that is a little bit anchored in older generations, and I include my generation. In fact, that to say, am I going to let go this control,
Yes,
and maybe this young lad is going to make us lose, I don't know, $10,000, 20 or 100.
yes,
that there was, I still have clearly in my mind the first week of work, of real work for me, and that somebody mentioned to me, no, you could lose money, and we don't want that. So you are
Mhm.
not responsible for
Yes.
anything. Mm,
Yes. So, two things to keep in mind that definitely two things. Definitely, you need to have psychological safety with high standard, high performance standards. So
mm,
it doesn't mean that you're going to share an idea and then we're going to do it. No,
mm,
we want to create an environment where speaking and sharing ideas is correct, but then you have the right standards and setup to basically act on that. That doesn't mean that everything that someone shares is going to be implemented. But the thing is that you are inviting participation, and at the same time, in a respectful manner, you just say, you know what, I think that this is the way that we have to go, and this is
mhm.
the way to follow. But
Yeah.
then you heard that person. You gave the opportunity for that person to share their thoughts. And this is basically what happened. So one thing that I think is really key, and I like that from like Amy Edmondson's research, is that again, we constantly need to look at psychological safety with our high standard performance. If you look at it like this, if we have a very low psychological safety and low performance standard,
Mm,
basically you're just in the apathy zone, nothing's happening. If you have low standard but high psychological safety, that's the comfortable environment that we're at. The majority of teams stays in high performance standards, but low psychological safety. So that's where the pressure is. That's where the stress is. So we need to perform. We have to do our best, but at the same time, we cannot talk. We cannot share.
mm.
And the ideal is that you have a high performance standard and high psychological safety. So you stay in the learning zone, which really favors performance.
You, I'm pretty sure that in your career you have observed and heard some common misconceptions about
Yes.
psychological safety, and that in fact is the root cause why implementation sucks. Uh, Tell me more about these
Why is
common misconceptions that people have about
I mean,
psychological safety.
I think that psychological safety, like any other terms related to culture, it's a bit touchy-feely for people. It's a bit vague. It's a
Mhm,
bit like too cloudy, too up in the ground, like too up in the clouds. So people don't know how to deal with it. Like that's the first thing. And unfortunately, since the corporations and businesses in general, they're used to the idea of trainings to change things, they think that they can change culture also, and psychological safety through a training. I think that there are a few things that people are missing. When we say team dynamics or culture, what do we mean? We mean our values, what's important for us, our behaviors,
mm,
how we do things, and our practices, our rituals. So if we accept this, improving your culture, bringing psychological safety, meaning creating a capacity where you can bring new behaviors and bring in new norms and rituals. And that doesn't happen after 3 hours. Like I always give this example that people want to add 20 minutes of walk to their daily habits, and it takes months to integrate that.
mm.
Here, we're talking not only about individual behavioral change, but also collective behavioral change. So the way you look at it has to be long term and consistent. And this is something that people actually miss about it. The other thing is, I think the terminology itself, as I said, that the minute that we say psychological safety for people is they compare it to physical safety and they think that okay, psychological safety means that if we don't have a harassment in the environment, we're good to go, or if people are like safe to walk, like we're good to go. And then there is that again, that third element that we see, that when we say psychological safety is just like okay, we're here to work, we're here to perform, we're
Mm,
not here, people are not here to talk about their feelings and about what they're going through. Whereas Google did this research for 5 years and came up with this idea that psychological safety was, I mean, the fact that psychological safety was a term that Amy Edmondson discussed it in 1999, and it took 17 years to get it to the business world. was actually because of the research around Google. Like no one talked about it, and it was stayed in the academia, but it was not necessarily a popular terminology in the business world. But then Google did this research for 5 years because they wanted to see how come some of their teams are like doing better or performing better than the others. And they thought that maybe it's the composition of the team, maybe it's the project, the nature of the project, the impact of it. And they realized that after 5 years and 80 million in the study and in the research, that the number one reason is psychological safety. When people feel vulnerable in front of each other, that's when they perform their best. And that's when psychological safety now becomes like a confetti word that we use all the time, everywhere. So the research is there that is at the core of performance. But again, like anything culture related and human based related, there are lots of leaders that they still think that they're nice to have, but they're not must to have.
Mm. There is there is a little bit of polarization also in the opinion about psychological safety. It's like, I don't know it, but I have already an opinion. I haven't seen it, or I make a conclusion out of, or a trend out of, I saw a lady who came to me and spoke to me about psychological safety, and this lady looked like a hippie. And she was talking about hugging her, or she was talking about love,
Yes.
or happiness, and we are here to make money. Uh,
Yes.
and and I have the impression that that biases the whole thing, is that
Yes.
people do not
There
want
is a
to know
bias.
what it is
Yes.
exactly because of the
Exactly.
impressions. Hmm?
Yes, there is a bias. I totally agree with you that there's a preconceived notion around it, but there's also the other thing, and actually that's a very good point, Ivan, that you're bringing it up, that so many people think that they know it, and they think that because they know it, they're going to bring it into their teams. And this is actually the example that I always say, is that everyone knows that they need to eat healthy, and everyone knows that they need to do exercise, but the wellness industry is still a billion-dollar industry because it's really hard to integrate. Like knowing is very different than
Mm.
doing. And that's why, to your point, like I think 45% of leaders around the world know about psychological safety, and only 25 or 26% of them are able to implement it, because these are two very different things. Like even if they know about it, if they've read Harvard Business Review, have read the books, the practices and fostering those practices and activate those behaviors to really promote psychological safety within a team dynamic, that's still a different thing. And that, I think, it's something that we're missing as well. That
I
I
have a,
know it, we're mastering it, we know it.
you're right, it takes time to do the changes. I have a gossip.
Yes.
2 months ago, I think I spoke with a lady from Google.
Yes.
And we were discussing just informally about psychological safety, because I knew
Yes.
about the
Yes, the
implementation and
research.
programs that they have. And despite the fact that this program has been like for 15 years or 10 years, I don't remember exactly, going on, still there is things to improve, and employees feel that there is still a gap. So it's
Yes,
not because you have been doing it for a long time that you have to stop doing it.
exactly.
Uh,
Exactly. It's a long-term thing. And we also worked with Google in like Montreal, and that's exactly the case. And we are hearing it all the time that again, we know it's important,
mhm,
but it loses priority,
mhm,
over delivering, over like deadlines, over projects. So if we have to do certain things, let's say if we have to do a check-in, if we have to do this, if we have to do, we don't do that because we need to perform. So again, and I think that it just shows, like any other thing, like democracy, like any other thing, these are not things that you can take for granted.
mhm.
Psychological safety is not something that you can take for granted. Like you have to constantly nurture it. You have to constantly work on it. And the other thing is that, our teams are living organisms. There are people going, there are people leaving, there are new departments, like there are new leadership, and it changes the dynamic, it changes people's behavior. So that's why we need to constantly focus on it. We have to be intentional about this concept.
Mm. In previous discussions, you have emphasized the fact that your implementations are based on science.
Yes.
And I wanted to, because I'm curious and I'm a geek also,
Yes.
what specific research or models are you using as a base of your practice?
I mean, the thing is that, there are like a few research, like, I mean, obviously Amy Edmondson came up with the term and she developed like certain frameworks for people and for leaders to deal with it. Then there was another, I think actually interesting framework by Timothy Clark, Four Stages of Psychological Safety, which says that psychological safety, the first step of it is really like a stepwise. So it's really like, it's like incrementally go up. It's inclusion safety. So, meaning that if people don't feel safe and don't feel connected, there is a low chance that they're going to activate behaviors or take risks that are going to lead to their learning. And if they don't have the learner safety, there's a low chance that they're going to take a risk to contribute, to give feedback. And obviously, if they don't have these safeties, there's a low chance that they're going to challenge the status quo. And that's why we see a lot that there are people, innovation is one of the things that people love to talk about. And obviously, in teams, everyone wants to talk about, like, innovation. But the question is that do your team members have these psychological safety to challenge the status quo? Because innovating, meaning that this is not good, meaning to say that this is not good, we're actually on the status quo, we need to change things, and it's a messy process. So that's the path to it. And I really like actually this. Based on everything that we heard, we've developed our own model around team dynamic improvement, that it's based on four like elements, basically. And to your point that you said at the beginning, I think that we're experts in psychological safety, but at core, we're also facilitators and really believe in experiential learning. So we know that something like psychological safety that is around like behavioral change, you cannot go and teach to people around about it. Like, people have to learn it through experience. So our model has the first step, which is the collaborative study. So we really want to assess it. We want to see where people are standing in terms of psychological safety and team performance. Then people in a very low risk environment, they're going to go through our program where they're going to test new ideas to be more included, to collaborate, to communicate, and to create together. We call it I+3C index. Then, based on everything that makes sense to them, because at the end of the day, we always tell people that an outsider cannot come in your team dynamic and tell you what to do, because you have your own language, you have your own way of doing things. So it has to make sense to you. It has to be authentic to your dynamic. So based on everything that people actually went through and they shared with us, we together we co-develop rituals, and that is when you can start integrating these rituals into everyday life. And to your point last time, we also have like a dotted dash back to collaborative study, because we know that this is not a process that you can do once and you say, okay, we've done it, we worked on this for 6 months and we're good to go. You constantly have to revisit a version of this and adapt it as you go.
Hmm. But I have the impression that this doesn't have to be done by same consultant or to pay an external person. It can be learned by companies how
Internal,
to self-sustain.
exactly. The
Hmm?
whole the whole point for us is that we basically empower and enable. We always call ourselves enablers. So we say we enable your team. We actually identify 2 or 3 people within your team to actually lead the way. And our job, we be just staying and just coaching you or helping you out, but it's
Hmm.
not going to be like the same involvement as the first year, because that doesn't work out. Like, you have
Hmm.
to actually create that autonomy and agility within your own team dynamic.
Hmm. Is there a way, like kind of scientifically, to assess psychological safety? Something that is, it could be through interviews. And how do you
Yes.
do it, in fact? So that is,
I
there
mean,
is.
the thing is that, Amy Edmondson, I mean, there are tons of actually assessments out there, like Fearless Organization, which is like based on the book that Amy Edmondson wrote in 2019. They do theirs. There are other people that they do their assessments with 7 questions, with 10 questions. We've developed our own assessment, which is really around, we have 2 versions of it, actually. Like, if your audience wants to do the free version, they're more than welcome. It's really based on the practices of leadership, because that is something that we can evaluate. Like what do I do, especially during interactions and meetings? What are the practices that I do to foster psychological safety and what where I can improve? Like this is tangible, you know what I mean? Like if you can just say that, yeah, we're inclusive. Like that's very hard to measure. But then if you actually measure the practices and the behaviors, that's actually easier. And we do have also a 360 team dynamic assessment where we assess the team and the leadership based on our four metric around psychological safety. As I said, we have our own metrics of inclusion, collaboration, communication, and creativity. Like we think that if you're activating or practicing behaviors that where people can actually that can foster inclusion, people can collaborate in, people can communicate, and they can create, probably you're going to be really high on the psychological safety level because you are activating behaviors that people feel comfortable taking risks in. So this is what we do, and we also have 10 metrics around team performance. However, we don't just stay around questions, because at the end of the day, people, like with surveys, you might not feeling good at that time, so you ask certain questions. In our kickoff meeting, we spend 2 hours in experiential learning setup to ask people what blocks them, like what undermines psychological safety. And we do it through like a experiential learning like practice, that we just hypothetically first we ask them that, you know what, in any team, tell us what undermines psychological safety and prevents people from taking risks. So it's really risk free because it's any team, it's not their team. So they go through it and they write about it. And then the next answer is that, let's talk about the ones that are present in your team and the ones that probably you're contributing to. And to your point, Yvette, like it's easy stuff. Like you think that killing psychological safety is a really hard thing to do, but if you're multitasking, if I'm talking to you, that already kills psychological safety for me. I don't feel comfortable sharing my thought the next time. If I say something and you say, "Oh, this is a great idea, we have to follow up on it," and then you never like follow up on it, you're killing psychological safety. You're killing that environment. So it's not, or like when I say that, you know what, this is actually might be a good idea. I said, no, 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 this is not part of the agenda. We're rushed. Again, you're killing it. You're micromanagement. Like, and I think that it's a very interesting exercise, that one, because as people do it, everyone is guilty of taking some of these of doing some of these practices. We all do that when we are stressed out. So the question is not, why we do it. It's just that be intentional about it and improve it and, do something different. So these are the two ways we do it, through assessments, but we're also doing through like experiential learning practices as well.
Love it. Um, I want to take advantage a little bit, Nogol.
Yes.
So I want to have like some free tips.
Yes,
Free
for
tips,
sure.
like imagine that there is an organization X. They want to improve. Let's don't
Yes.
say that they are the worst in psychological safety. So what do you see as actions that they can take
Yes.
on the spot and that gives like easy results?
Easy
Very
results all the way. For sure, for sure. And I have to say that the majority, there are some teams that they're really low on psychological safety, almost toxic environment. And there are some teams that they're really amazing psychological safety. But I have to say the majority of teams, they're average in the middle. So
quick.
to your point, they're not absolutely the worst. They're not absolutely like the best, but definitely they have more room for improvement. Some of, the tips that we give is usually around meetings and interactions, because this is, it's a group setup that it's a great example of your psychological safety. Do people share their thoughts, or do you have only few people dominating the conversation? Do people bring like the hard conversations? Do they talk about the challenge, or no one talks about anything that's not working, and then after the meeting it becomes a gossip? Like what? So this is actually, so we think that meetings could be a great place to actually foster and promote psychological safety. Some of the tips that we say, you want to, in order to foster psychological safety, you want to do three things. You want to first set up the stage and frame things. If, for example, in your team, making mistakes is equal to failure, and failure, it means that it's really bad and there's retaliation, then obviously no one's going to share their mistake. How can you reframe that for your team? How can you set up the stage as a leader? And we're going to talk about that. After that, you want to make sure that you invite participation. You want to make sure that people are actually going to share, especially the hard stuff. And finally, you want to, you know, respond proactively and you respond productively. Because there's one thing people speaking up, but then if if you don't answer well, then that's still not psychological safety. So few ideas. The first thing that we think is extremely powerful, and we see that with lots of our clients, is doing check-ins at the beginning of meetings. And what is check-in and what is not check-in? Check-in is not how was your weekend, how did you like your wedding, or what are you gonna do. They're amazing stuff, don't get me wrong, like always starting at a human connection. We call this connection before content. This is actually what we call it. So you want to make sure that there is a connection before you jump into the agenda. However, when we say check-ins, there are two purposes for check-ins. Either you want to get a pulse of how people are joining this like meeting or this interaction. So you do like a mindset check-in. Like, how are you coming into the meeting? Like, how do you feel in one or two words? Or like, what is your weather status? What is your meteo? Like, and people say, okay, I'm cloudy, or I'm like, this is actually stormy here. So not only you gave an opportunity for people to share their thoughts and share their emotions, which already it's amazing, but you also get a pulse from the team. They said, okay, this person, I cannot expect too much from them. The other one is icebreaker questions. But again, one of the things that we actually love, people love about it, is that if you were stationary, like, the stuff in the office, what would it be? And you have to see how people's eyes shine, because people love to talk about themselves and they say, I'm the highlighter, I'm the stapler. So not only they get to think about themselves in a creative way, but others also get to learn more about their teams and how they perceive themselves. And again, there's two interesting research that shows that everyone says, oh my goodness, we don't have time for that. First of all, it's 3 or 4 minutes max. Research shows that when people talk about less than a minute at the beginning of a meeting to share something that is not that important, like it's not that risky, there is a higher chance that they're going to voice out their ideas later on.
Yeah.
So that's why it is very key and essential. The other one is around women participation. Research shows that in general, when women talk at the beginning of meetings, there's a higher chance that both men and women will contribute. But when men start the conversation or like share their voices, women sometimes actually they hesitate. And women, for checking questions, they're more prone to actually answer and like participate. So again, we're creating an opportunity for equitable sharing. So that's one tip that I cannot tell you how much. And I have to say that it's not going to change in a day. Like, you have to be in it. You're not going to get good answers at the beginning. People want to perform. People want to perfect. They want to please their leaders at the beginning. But with time, we see that we have clients and teams that they always start their teams. They never like go the meeting without a check-in, and they already see the contribution and engagement during the meeting. So that is one. And as important as that is also the checkout question, like the check-in is really create the context. It's set up the stage. We say, okay, this is the place that maybe I can take a risk with these questions. Checkout is really where you close. It's a closure side, and again, anything else? How was your meeting? Are you always happy? Like, these are not checkout question. Checkout question, you want to get a feedback on the meeting, how to improve it. You want to actually ask people about their takeaway or their next steps, so they're really clear about what they need to do. And again, you want to do a mindset check-in. Oh, okay, like, how are you leaving the session with? Then we have in the middle of the meeting, that we want people to talk. What do we want to talk about? We want them to talk about their different ideas. We want them to talk about issues and problems, and we want them to share that half-baked idea, because that might be the creative idea we're searching for. Some of the questions. Does anyone have anything different to say? It's already scary. Like, you're not going to share it. So the way you invite to participate here is extremely important, and the way you answer. You want to invite people to participate. You want participation by asking questions that are rooted in curiosity and really giving people the permission to share their thoughts. Like, instead of say, does anyone have any different idea to share? Say, what are the different perspectives that we're missing here? Like, this is a kind of a question, like, what are we missing here? Like, what are we not seeing? Like, what is the challenge that we're just not talking about? It's rooted really in knowing the information, in seeking the information, in curiosity. And you really say, guys, come on, just share what you have. And the other thing is just to answer that. How do you answer it? You want to definitely appreciate people when they share like their thoughts and say, you know what, I know this was not easy, but thank you so much. You want to stay respectful. And even if it's not a good idea, to your point, when you were at the beginning, you shared an idea and someone said, this is not good, we're going to lose money. But you still actually appreciate the thought and said, I want to hear your thoughts all the time. However, I think this is a path forward for us. So in that sense, you're creating an effective collaboration. It doesn't mean that people will talk forever and we're gonna follow their leads, but we give an opportunity for people to voice out their ideas.
Nogol, I love that in less than 5 minutes you have done a recap of something that I do believe that it will have impact. But
Yes.
that's the problem also in corporations that they believe that, oh, if I do exactly what Nogol says, then it's going to change. But the
Mhm.
problem is that by listening, because behind every change, because we have been formatted with certain rituals, with certain behaviors that we would continuously repeat in order to change.
Yes,
And if we think about ourselves, while you were talking, I was thinking how difficult it is to have patience with my teenage daughter, for instance. It,
exactly.
it takes me time and repetition and mistakes.
Repetition. Yes, exactly. That's the other thing that, it's always, I heard it somewhere that it was very interesting for me that there was this guy that said that the only people that want to change in the world, they're like babies with wet diapers. Unless, unless none of us want to change,
Yeah.
unless the benefit of that change is bigger than the pain that we have to go through that change. And that's why experimentation here is very important.
Hmm.
When you start doing this stuff, we see that actually through our program, that when people start to see, like they start to do it. And at the beginning, I would say that the first 2 or 3 weeks to say, okay, what are we doing? What are we doing? This is funny. Okay, we don't have time for this. Well, on week 3, usually that's our threshold. People say, oh my goodness, it's working. I'm seeing the impact. And that's when they see the impact and they know the why behind it and they know the benefit, that they're going to start practicing it and they start, like practicing it and integrate it into their daily life. And that's why you cannot do it once or twice. You have to be committed to it. You have to experiment it. You cannot force it. And once all of the team members and the leadership see actually the opportunity and the impact that it has and actually the benefit of it, then say, you know what, this is something that we're going to stick to. But you need to be actually committed to it.
Yep. How do we address this recurrent problem with power dynamics? So there
Yes.
is old CEO who has always done the things on his own way. Nobody trusts that he's going to
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
And probably is the reason why it inhibits the
Mm.
psychological safety. And even I'm thinking just loud, even in certain cultural setups, like you go to Japan or Korea,
Yes, for sure. Definitely.
anything.
Yes, exactly. And that's a very good question. Definitely cultural setups within different societies really makes like integrating psychological safety like difficult or easy. So that's definitely the case. And it might like, it will follow the certain culture like dynamics that exist in certain, like countries, as you said. However, when you said about like power dynamics, what I've learned, Ivan, in the last like 7 years, the leaders that give us the opportunity to help them out and to support them, they're the leaders that are not benefiting from that power dynamic and that hierarchy, and that they already have a different setup, different mindset. They know that they have to be more collaborative and more inclusive, but they don't have the tools necessarily. However, they've already accepted the fact that this is not the way to go. that is something that, it's really hard if you have like a know-it-all. And and I'm not like blaming anyone or anything. If you're growing up in that mindset and you don't necessarily have that self-reflection, and this is the way to go for you, that and when we see that, like, there are leaders in meetings that they cannot even sit silent. They just can't, and they are stressed out. They think that, what, I'm the one who has to fill up the room. I'm the one. I cannot be silent. Like, I have to have all the answers. So unless leaders know that they have to go from know it all to learn it all, they have to go from this, I'm the leader, I'm the hierarchy, go to more flat, like collaborative and inclusive setups. Like, unless they have that knowledge and that awareness, it's really hard to change that dynamics. However, the question is usually is that when they do have that awareness and that consciousness, and they know that this is not the way to go and they're not getting the best performance from their team, the question is that how can we support them and give them the tools and equip them with the things? And the most important thing that we always tell leaders is that wear your facilitation hat during interactions and meetings. Yes, you need to guide the conversation. Yes, you need to talk about certain things, but leave a bit of space for other people to also share. So being that facilitator slash leader, this is what you want to have. But again, don't forget that it's very different from that old leadership style that is already a huge gap between, like, there's a hierarchy, there is a gap. Like, we want to, one thing we always say is that if you don't model psychological safety and vulnerability, you're not going to have psychological safety in your team. Like, we have leaders that come to us and say that no one asks for help in our team or no one shares mistake. And my first question is that, do you do that? Like, do you,
Yeah.
do you do that? Because no one's going to take more risk. Your team members and your team will never take more risk than you do, and they will never be more vulnerable than you do. So, at the core of an inclusive leader who wants to foster psychological safety is this acceptance that I'm approachable, I make mistakes and failable, and that I invite participation and I need others to contribute and to perform together. So this is really the foundation. If you don't have that foundation, probably you need a bit more education and conscious and awareness around before starting the practices around psychological safety.
What what is crazy is that the expression of psychological safety is not the same uh, by industry, by countries. So, like, let's say, like in France, it would be a little bit more about this mini jokes against women or against the
Yes,
new guy. In the
exactly.
Middle East, it will be the fear of doing something different than what he's paid for. So taking
Exactly.
initiative because he gets slapped as soon
Yes,
as he does
exactly.
a, a mistake. So there is a different approach. So it is almost impossible to say there is one way to solve the problem of psychological safety for a given
No,
company.
no,
It could
definitely.
be uh, dealt with information. It
Yes,
could be an assessment, and even if there is averages, it can be pockets of there is psychological safety in the sales department, but not in the marketing department.
that's
Uh,
exactly it.
yeah,
That's
exactly.
exactly it. And we were just like, we had a session last week, and there was exactly this lady who was a VP, I think at Air Canada, and she mentioned that. She said that, what, we have psychological safety. I have it within my team, so I invite participation. People share, but then when they go to the other teams, they're actually crossing the boundaries in other teams
Yeah.
because they don't have that definition of psychological safety. So their framing and they're like setting the stage is very different. So this, to your point, it's really, so that's why I think that one of the things that we do through this 10-week program is that, okay, there is a psychological safety definition by scholars and all of that. But after 10 weeks, what does it mean to you, to your team, to your leadership team? Because if you don't have that definition for yourself, you don't know how to promote it and what are the practices that are killing it. So you have to be really clear and concrete about what does it mean what are the barriers and what are the promoters? Like, what are the things that encourage psychological safety based on our definition, and what are the ones that really inhibit psychological safety? So, to your point, we have to, at the end of the day, we can have the foundational like description and definitions, but it has to become like an authentic definition that everyone across the board are aligned with.
Do you have a piece of advice for this audience who is hesitating because they have heard different versions about how to tackle psychological safety? Do you have a piece of advice to give them?
Yeah. I mean, read about it and learn it.
Mm,
Learn the like observe within your team dynamics. Just see, it doesn't mean if you're a leader, it doesn't mean if you're an employee. If you're sitting in a meeting and if you're intentional, you can see that, oh my goodness, that was a great exercise because it invites that person to share. Or
mm,
that was really interesting because now I feel comfortable talking. Or that was very collaborative. You can definitely observe the behaviors that it's promoting psychological safety, and you see the ones that are killing it. Obviously, if you don't have that common knowledge or common language, you cannot necessarily go to leadership or change it. But if you are at the leadership position, embrace those practices. And the other thing I just have to say is that small, consistent actions. Small, consistent actions and small, consistent actions. After our 3 hour sessions or after our programs, everyone wants to do everything because
mm.
you're just too excited and it's just, oh my goodness. So I'm going to do the check-in, I'm going to do the checkout, I'm going to do these questions, and then I'm going to do this, and I'm going to sit back and facilitate. Doesn't work like that. We call this 15%. And we say that, 15% of your goal is that if you want to walk during the day, the first 15% is that you just buy walking shoes, running, jogging shoes. The second 50% is that you put it at the door to just remind yourself that I have to start. The first day is that you do 5 minutes. So it's really small, consistent actions. If there is one thing that it's not working, start with that and just call out that. If there is one thing that is working, focus on that and promote that. Like, just be consistent about it. Small actions, don't overwhelm yourself, because we understand, and I have empathy for leaders and teams. At the end of the day, your job is not to create psychological safety. Your job is to deliver, your job is to work together and to perform together. However, psychological safety is your tool, is
Mm.
your vehicle, is your motor. So give it the priority that it needs so that it's always there, but it's not overwhelming you and overshadowing the work that you have to do. And definitely the other thing is that ask for help from experts like you, like us, like ask for support, because as leaders, you don't need to know all the answers.
It is incredible. Like, I listen to you, I agree with everything that you say, and especially this little word that talks about the consistent behaviors that are going to
Yes.
create the biggest change in
Yes.
culture. And that's something that I'm totally with you. And there is a lot of misunderstanding that there is today behavioral science that has become a little bit more accessible for everyone in order to understand human
Yes.
behavior and nudge people to the big changes. But you
Yes.
cannot do that with a big talk from someone
No.
that is when no.
Exactly. Well, you cannot do it with a 3 day. Sometimes we always say that our program culture can be 10 weeks, 10 hours, and say that, can we do it in 2 days, like 5 hours? And I said, no, you can't. Can you go to the gym for 2 days and then just continue eating burgers? And after 10 weeks, say that, how come I'm not the same? I'm the same. That you cannot. The whole thing is that it is that consistency that creates that behavioral change. So that is also a bit of like, bit of like knowledge that we have to just like embrace it.
Indeed. Nogol, how can people reach you out for questions
Yeah,
about psychological safety, about how to improve cultures?
for
What is the
sure.
best way, in fact?
I mean, www.gleefactor.com. We have actually our website both in English and French. You can book a call. Find me on LinkedIn. Find Nogol Madani. Find Glee Factor on LinkedIn. As I said, we do offer monthly workshops around anything around psychological safety. And we also have our free assessment that could be actually a great starting point. And yes, I always say that I cannot stop talking about psychological safety. So if anyone wants to talk and wants to help, I'll be more than happy to hear them out and to have an exchange with them.
I'm going to be putting the link to your LinkedIn profile, to Glyph Factor, and to this free psychological safety assessment because that is super important. You have to see it to believe
Yes.
it.
Exactly. Just to get an idea and get a feel of it. I understand that these are not tangible things. So I think the minute that you can just connect your practices and your actions to to psychological safety score, then it becomes like a bit more tangible as a concept.
Hmm. Thank you very much, Nogol, for
Thank you so much,
this
Yvette, for
wonderful
having
time
me.
spent with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.